Hello and welcome to The Steamy, the Scotsman's politics podcast. I'm Alistair Grant, the political editor of The Scotsman, and I'm joined today by Rachel Amery, the Scotsman's political correspondent, by deputy political editor David Bol, and by Andrew Quinn, the Scotsman's Westminster correspondent. And John Swinney has been announcing his new cabinet and ministers in the government. I think the top line, or at least the top line that we went on in today's paper, was his creation of this entirely new cabinet role to oversee public sector cuts of £1 billion, as he unveiled what he described as a leaner, more agile top team. He said the appointments could be seen as a very clear signal his government will push for fiscal sustainability amid warnings of a forecasted £5 billion black hole by the end of the decade. It's Ivan McKee that's taking up that new role. He'll be the first ever Public Service Reform Secretary with responsibility for the government's reform strategy, which includes reducing spending on corporate functions across public bodies to deliver £1 billion of efficiency savings over 5 years. What are corporate functions, you might ask? That's a very good question. We've never really had total detail about where these cuts will come from, but the workforce is expected to be reduced across public bodies. Elsewhere, some of the big names: Jenny Gilruth, the former Education Secretary, promoted to Deputy First Minister and Finance Secretary. We had Stephen Flynn, the former SNP Westminster leader who made the switch to Holyrood at the election earlier this month. He was appointed the Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Tourism, Transport, probably one of the most difficult jobs in government, with that transport portfolio. Includes challenging areas like the ferries, the dualling of the A9. I think probably the only job more challenging in terms of frontline issues is the health portfolio. Elsewhere, we had Neil Gray, Angela Constance swapping their respective portfolios. Neil Gray was the Health Secretary. He's becoming Justice Secretary. Angela Constance moving to Health. Mary McAllen, who was tipped actually as a potential Deputy First Minister, and some are interpreting it as a bit of a snub that she didn't get that job, considering she had quite a high-profile role during the Holyrood election campaign. But she's taking over the education portfolio, formerly held by Jenny Gilruth, as well as the culture and Gaelic briefs. Gillian Martin continuing as Climate Action Secretary. Shirley-Anne Somerville keeping her social justice brief. And I think it's probably worth saying as well that we had former MPs Stephen Geffins, Kirsten Oswald, Alison Foulis, all taking on junior ministerial roles. David, you wrote a big analysis piece about this after the kind of names emerged yesterday, and we saw all those ministers walking into Butte House to get their new roles. It's always quite cringe watching them kind of smile and wave to the cameras as they kind of walk through the door. But what did you make of this?
Yeah, it is always quite cringe, particularly when it's pretty much the same people. But I guess we kind of expected that. It would have been a bit weird if John Swinney had kind of binned off a lot of his more senior cabinet ministers. So I don't think it would do the SNP any harm to, as you mentioned there, no one's got exactly the same job other than John Swinney. So even like Gillian Martin, who's still the kind of climate action, she's taken on a whole other brief that Marie Goujon was doing before, and sort of, it is related. It's kind of the rural affairs brief, but it's a huge, complicated area. So everyone seems to have more responsibility or different responsibilities. And I think a government that's been in power for so long under the SNP, okay, it's lots of different people from when they first came to power. It's not going to do them any harm having these fresh eyes. The Ivan McKee role is quite interesting. It's kind of the job he was doing as a junior minister. It's just been obviously elevated given the prominence of it. It's a bit strange, I think, how he can do that separate to the finance secretary job. I do think those kind of go hand in hand, because he's going to need to work very closely with Jenny Gilruth, who will be kind of setting the budget. And he'll be trying to kind of cut the money. So those jobs will be very linked, and it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works. Also, it's interesting that there's no constitution kind of cabinet secretary anymore. John Swinney taking personal responsibility for that. Although I do think that Stephen Geffins' junior job, which is that constitution and external affairs, along with energy, is kind of feels like quite a cabinet role that he won't sit in cabinet. So that feels quite a prominent role that he'll take on just without sitting in cabinet. But quite an interesting mix of people and different jobs for people. So we'll see how they go on. A lot of these policy areas have been quite tricky politically for the SNP to navigate, particularly in health, although they are quite proud of their record. Obviously, Angela Constance was under a lot of pressure as Justice Secretary. There was an attempt to kind of get her sacked towards the end of the last parliamentary term. So it'll be interesting to see whether that kind of fresh face and shaking things up a little bit albeit with the same people, will take some of the heat off the SNP government.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, David makes a good point there. Many of these faces are the exact same. I mean, in the cabinet itself, not including all the junior ministers, the only entirely new face, if you can call him that, is Stephen Flynn. He's kind of come in, he's got a big role, but it's kind of it's the same people just swapping around jobs. I mean, it is a slimmed down cabinet. It's 9, including the First Minister, down from 12 before the election. What did you make of this?
Yeah, I was one of the journalists yesterday, camped outside Butte House in the rain, trying to spot them all going in, and unfortunately got very damp in the process. So I'll need to learn my lesson for next time to bring waterproofs and umbrellas and all the rest of it for when the rains come down. But yeah, everyone who was in the cabinet last time round who got re-elected is still there. And if we ignore the sort of the facet that Ivan McKee was a junior minister getting promoted, if we ignore that fact, then it's completely the same people plus Stephen Flynn, who we were all expecting to get a job. So we were all kind of waiting to see when he would turn up. He was the last cabinet secretary to be asked into Butte House. And we kind of all were waiting to see, because everyone else that had come through before that was like, okay, we know that person was going to come back. We knew that person was most likely going to be brought back in. So yeah, not new faces. Maybe that is why the jobs are slightly mixed up a little bit. There's some very big portfolios that were previously done by 2 people now being squished into 1. That's going to cause problems. I know already some people in the housing sector, for example, quite upset that housing's no longer a standalone role, for example. And as you were saying, Stephen Flynn's got a very hard task ahead of him, particularly the transport brief. A lot of people do think that is the poison chalice, because it's almost impossible to win at that job, because you've got the ferries crisis, you're now responsible for keeping the A9 dualling on track, you're now in charge of ScotRail. It's all these things that don't seem to ever sort themselves out. That being said, there is a track record of people who have the transport brief doing well. I mean, that was Humza Yousaf's job and he became First Minister. It was Jenny Gilruth's job at a certain point and she's now Deputy First Minister. So if he can prove himself to do well, it does give his ambitions of becoming First Minister a pretty big boost if he is able to see that. So lots of eyes to see whether he can go from being someone who is well respected in the House of Commons for making good speeches and holding the UK government to account. Can he transfer that over into the hard work of being a cabinet secretary? So that's the sort of the big task ahead for him. Looking at the junior ministers, that's a few more new faces, a lot of the former MPs, which is what we were expecting. I was convinced that Stephen Gethins was going to get a cabinet job, particularly because the job that he has got was cabinet level last time around. And he is very, very talented and well respected and quite experienced as well. So quite surprised that he's not got a cabinet job, but I understand that they're wanting to slim things down. And there's a few other new faces. We've got Smita Kumar, who was, I believe, Edinburgh councillor, I think. Yes, I'm seeing a nod there. Edinburgh councillor. So she has now gone into the equalities brief. And the other one is Hannah Mary Goodlad, the Shetland Islands MSP. She has been an MSP for less than a week and has already been given the job of Public Finance Minister, a very, very quite a high profile, powerful job. So very interesting that someone with a lot of background in other areas, but not necessarily a political background, gone straight into government, which is interesting to look at too. So plenty of things to be keeping an eye out for. And I'm sure over the coming days, we will start to see different sectors of public life in Scotland coming out with their asks and their demand of this new cabinet, because they're pretty much the exact same people, just shifted around a wee bit.
Yeah, Andrew, what did you make of Stephen Flynn? I mean, he's in the face of it, he's been handed this very prominent role. He's got this huge platform now. He's going to play a big role in government. But on the other hand, as I think you yourself described it yesterday, it's a bit of a hospital pass in the sense that it's also this kind of poison chalice. Transport is notoriously difficult. Even if you're an extremely able politician, things are going to go wrong. Things are not going to go right with these massive infrastructure projects, particularly going into winter. There's all sorts of issues that emerge. Rachel mentioned ScotRail. I mean, that's just a recurring issue yearly. So what did you make of the fact of his job? And the other point that Rachel made was that he's got this sort of very strong reputation as this great parliamentary performer in Westminster, but that is so different from actually having a public service delivery role in government. They are two very different things. And if you want to, if you see yourself as a potential future First Minister, which I think everyone knows Stephen Flynn does, you need to prove you can do this.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be difficult for him. I mean, it's probably, I would say, the brief with the least likely chance of success, you know what I mean? Because of like the ferry stuff is just ongoing, isn't it? We've not got the two big Ferguson Marine ferries really up and running properly yet. So that's going to be an issue. I'm sure there's going to be more problems with that, like there always is. It's never plain sailing. So yeah, it's going to be really difficult for him. I know Stephen Flynn a wee bit just from being in Westminster the last few years. I think he'll be pretty up for it though, and he probably wanted a role where it would be challenging in the sense of what he wants to prove to folk that he can do that. But yeah, it is completely different. I mean, he was a bit of a breath of fresh air when he became SNP Westminster leader because he's so direct in PMQs or just in the chamber in general. It was this guy from Dundee, Brecon, representing Aberdeen, who no one had really heard of, and he was really cutting through. And he'd done that really well over the past few years. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. I think it will also be interesting to see what the dynamics are like, with people kind of coalescing around him as a group. As you mentioned, there's lots of former MPs who are now in Holyrood, and quite a few of them are Stephen Flynn allies. So like Stephen Bonner, who's the Uddingston and Bells Hill MSP, David Linden, the East End of Glasgow, Alan Brown. They were all part of this Tuesday Club in Westminster, which is a kind of group which helped get Stephen Flynn the Westminster leader job. So he's going to have his own power base. He's also got colleagues who work in the different party positions as well, allies there. So that'll be really interesting to see. And if it doesn't go badly in the transport brief, like saying it goes well, it's quite difficult really for it to go well in the transport brief, I think. If it doesn't go too badly, then he'll really have set himself up for a leadership bid. And we don't know how long really John Swinney will stay. I know he said he'll stay until the next election, but obviously he had initially planned to retire at this election. So, yeah, it's a real challenge for Flynn, but I think he probably needs to do something like this, doesn't he, if he wants to lead the country and the SNP.
And what do we think about Mary McAllen? Do we think she was snubbed? I mean, that is some of the narrative you hear in Holyrood. She was obviously being tipped as a potential Deputy First Minister. I know in the days leading up to this kind of unveiling of the new cabinet, sources close to John Swinney were telling people, including, I think, Rachel, that Mary McAllen is not a done deal, that people shouldn't just expect it's inevitable she'll be Deputy First Minister. That turned out to be very true. But David, do you think she will interpret this as a snub? Do you think she has been snubbed?
I actually don't think she will. It does feel like one because everyone's just assumed she'd get it because she played that kind of prominent role in the election campaign. She obviously stood in for John Swinney at a few election events, including our own hustings, where she was quite punchy against reform. So I think she was quite effective in that role in the election. But obviously she's got a huge job as Education Secretary, and she's kind of, whenever she's been asked about it, I know they all do this, but she's kind of played down her own kind of leadership ambitions. But I think it's just because everyone assumed she was going to get it has made it feel like a bit of a snub. I can see why people would think that. I'm a bit surprised that Jenny Gilruth has got that job, though, I will say. I thought maybe Angela Constance or Shelley-Ann Somerville, given their kind of experience, and they've been there a long time, would get that. And to give Jenny Gilruth that alongside the finance secretary job is a huge role for her to take on. But again, it will put her in the frame against Stephen Flynn as a potential successor now. I know she kind of talked up herself when Nicola Sturgeon stood down briefly as a potential SNP leader candidate, but that kind of went a bit quiet with the kind of turmoil in the party. But this, if she can kind of prove herself, will put her right back in there again. All the talk was about Kate Forbes obviously succeeding before she decided to call it a day. So other than Stephen Flynn, there will be someone else who will probably want to be in with a shout of succeeding John Swinney, and Jenny Gilruth looks like she's put herself or John Swinney has put her in a very strong position to make that case for her.
Yeah, I totally think it's setting up that Jenny Gilruth v Stephen Flynn battle in the future. I mean, giving Jenny Gilruth that prominent role is very much setting her up as a potential successor. And I think you're right. I mean, one of the funny things I always think about stuff like the Mary McAllen, will she become Deputy First Minister or not? It's very hard to identify where this narrative comes from. And I think one of the things about the Holyrood bubble is it can be kind of self-perpetuating. It just becomes a kind of truism. And then when it doesn't happen, people sort of interpret it as a snub, perhaps rightly in this case. I don't know. But I mean, it's kind of, is it just journalists saying that to each other? Is it just a couple of politicians that are putting this around? Was it ever actually the case? It's always quite hard to tell. But Rachel, we should touch on the fact that we've obviously just left the Holyrood election. It feels already like a long time ago. But if people hope to move on from politics, they're out of luck because we've got 2 by-elections coming caused by MPs making the switch to Holyrood. We've got Aberdeen South and we've got Arbroath and Broughty Ferry. I know you wrote a piece recently on these 2 Scottish by-elections. We'll come on to another big by-election that's happening in the UK very soon. But what should people know about these?
Yeah, this is on the back of Stephen Flynn and Stephen Gethin's moving from Westminster to Holyrood. I believe 18th of June has been set as the date for these 2 by-elections. Now, they're really the SNP's by-elections to lose here. Yes, they're the incumbents to these 2 seats, but they are sort of safe areas for them. The more interesting seat here is Aberdeen South. That was Stephen Flynn's seat, and the Conservatives are really, really wanting this seat. We've already heard Kenny Badenoch, for example, really bigging up the Conservatives' chances. And that's because they came very, very close in the Holyrood equivalent seat, which is Aberdeen, Deeside and North Kincardine, which is the seat that Stephen Flynn actually won. I've got my election book of doom in front of me, so I can just check the numbers. So Stephen Flynn only beat the Conservatives there by 1,244 votes. That's not a very big majority at all. And so because of that, the Conservatives think they've really got this in the bag. The problem is the boundaries are slightly different. So the Holyrood seat takes in North Kincardine. That's a bit more Conservative leaning, whereas the Westminster seat takes in a bit more of central Aberdeen, which is more SNP leaning. So while they sound the same and they're technically the equivalent seats between Westminster and Holyrood, the boundaries are slightly different, and that does play into the SNP's favour here. So while the Conservatives have got great hopes, particularly on the back of the election results in the area, it's probably not as good a chance as they want to think it is. Reform are also after the seat too. They've also been up campaigning and making a big campaign launch in the area too. But again, because of how popular the SNP is in the area, they will struggle to cut through. It would be difficult to see the Reform Party taking either of these 2 by-elections. We of course need to take it seriously, particularly in the northeast, but I really do think we are looking at the SNP here with the Conservatives giving them a little bit of a challenge in Aberdeen South. Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, it's a bit more of a more simple topic there. We are starting to really get into SNP heartlands there. I mean, that whole East Coast is very SNP loyal, but as we're starting to get further south into the sort of the Dundee area, famously Yes City from the independence referendum, that is really SNP heartland. I can't really see there being any sort of discussion about any other party being a serious challenger to the SNP there. One thing that's quite interesting just to note is the candidates for the SNP have just been announced, and I believe that Dave Duggan, who is now the SNP Westminster leader, his son, who is now one of the advisors to the party down in Westminster, I believe it's his girlfriend that has now got the position for the Arbroath and Broughty Ferry candidacy. It's an interesting point there to make out. Plenty to think about, and we will of course be keeping an eye on all the insights of those 2 by-elections between now and a month's time.
Well, from the Scottish by-elections to Makerfield, look at that segue, the seat that Andy Burnham is hoping to win and have his comeback to Westminster and potentially become the next Prime Minister. Andrew, I know you've been following this closely. What is the latest on this?
Yeah, so Andy Burnham was selected as a candidate this week. It doesn't seem like anyone stood against him. So that really it's set him up for a chance to return to the House of Commons after 10 years away as Mayor of Greater Manchester. But the thing is, it's not sewn up at all. There were council elections at the same time as the Holyrood election, and Reform won something like 24 of the 25 seats in that local borough. So Reform will really be hoping to win it. It should be pretty close. So that's why I actually think the Aberdeen South by-election Reform won't really focus on very much at all, because they'll put almost all their resources from across the UK into Makerfield, because if they could get that scalp, basically it would suggest that Labour are done for at the general election if Andy Burnham can't win that seat, because he's got such a popular personal mandate. I can't remember if I said this when we were on last week, but when Andy Burnham won the Greater Manchester mayor election in 2024, he won in every single ward in Greater Manchester, not just every borough. So it's crazy. He won about 2/3 of the vote. So like he's crazy popular. I reckon his popularity's probably even gone up since like the Labour government's been doing badly, because he looks as a credible alternative. So he could definitely buck the trend for what's going on with Labour. It was interesting as well. I had a story earlier this week. Wes Streeting allies are planning to campaign for Andy Burnham in the seat. A couple of Scottish ones, Melanie Ward, Gordon McKee. So I think they're kind of doing that because essentially they want a leadership contest, which Andy Burnham would be able to trigger, but Wes Streeting doesn't really have enough support to do. So yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, a lot of Scottish Labour folk, I reckon, will be campaigning more in Makerfield than they will in the two Scottish by-elections, which I guess shows their chances in Scotland at the moment. But yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, I saw a poll today which suggested that if Labour were led by Andy Burnham, then they could still be the biggest party at the next general election. That's what polling kind of says, because he's got such personal appeal. Now, obviously, it could be completely different. He could come in and be dead unpopular once he comes in, but it shows that there's a bit of an opportunity there, perhaps, for Labour to turn things around quickly if he's elected. But it could be, as I say, it could be a complete damp squib and Reform win it. And I mean, from a journalistic point of view, that would be quite interesting, obviously. But yeah, we'll just need to wait and see what happens. And I'm sure the pollsters and stuff will be going out in the seat, and we'll get a bit more of info about how things are on the ground soon.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually, about Aberdeen South and Reform. And I thought it was interesting as well. I mean, you probably shouldn't read too much into this, but I mean, so much of elections happen on social media now. Andy Burnham's video, the kind of announcement of his candidacy, very, very slick, but very kind of focused on him being a prime ministerial candidate. There was lots of kind of members of the public coming up to him, saying how great he is, saying you'd make a great prime minister. Yeah. And then Reform's Robert Kenyon had a very slick video that was basically focused on him being the local candidate who just wants to stick up for the local area. I think he's a plumber. He was totally focused on the fact that Andy Burnham's just using this as a stepping stone. Do you think that will have cut through that perception that Andy Burnham is basically just using this to become prime minister and doesn't really care about it in any other way?
I think it could. I think it would more if Keir Starmer wasn't so unpopular. But I think the idea that somebody wants to come in and get rid of him isn't something that people will object to. You know what I mean? So yeah, it could though, and I think it's quite a smart ploy from Reform. The only issue is they're kind of using that against Andy Burnham, but they parachute folk in all the time. I mean, Nigel Farage went to Clacton because they knew that was the most likely seat for Reform to win in. Like, you know what I mean? He's from London. So, and Andy Burnham actually is from nearby Makerfield. It's not that he's got no connection. I'm pretty sure his kids go to school or went to school in the seat. So, yeah, he is relatively local. I don't know. I think it's quite a good attempt from Reform, but Andy Burnham's so popular in Greater Manchester that it's hard to see that will really work. It's such a mad situation, though, isn't it? Like, we've got a guy he's the Labour candidate on a platform that he wants to get rid of the Labour Prime Minister. Like, it's surreal, and the Labour Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, couldn't block him from doing it because it would have looked weak. It's just absolute madness. And yeah, it'll be great to watch. So that's the by-elections on the same day as the Scottish ones as well. It's on the June 18th. But unfortunately, I'll be missing it because I'll be stateside watching Scotland hopefully not get beat at the World Cup.
Oh man. Yes, it is a weird platform. Vote Labour because Labour are crap. Essentially, is what he's going to be saying. Vote Labour so that I can go in and change Labour. But we'll see. I mean, people might want to kind of be part of what they might perceive as a kind of history-making moment. And it's unfortunate for the Scottish by-elections that are on the same day. I mean, we'll be forlornly writing about them. Can people please care about this too? But we will have to wait and see what happens. That's all we've got time for this week. Please stay tuned to the Scotsman's website for all the latest news, comment, analysis. There's loads still to happen at Holyrood. We'll have the first FMQs next week. I think we should get more information today about how Parliament is going to work this term in terms of who's going to go first at FMQs, Reform or Labour. I know this is total insider baseball and there's probably about 6 people in the country that care about this, but they're all on this podcast. So here we go. Thanks very much for